Some of us are hardwired to care way too much about every little thing. And when we're wired in this way, everyday decisions can feel like life or death. Doing, quote, normal things can leave us on the verge of panic. And every day is an exhausting, grueling battle of attrition just to get to the end. You feel like you're walking through a minefield, getting up, going to work, talking to people, driving, doing whatever else you have to do in a day. Living with chronic anxiety, which is what we call this condition, is incredibly hard. And because it's incredibly hard, people with chronic anxiety often end up with some pretty intense coping mechanisms to help get them through the day and deal with this debilitating condition. Unfortunately, because brains are annoying and weird sometimes, many of the strategies we often use to try and reduce our anxiety actually end up not only not helping, but making it worse, feeding, fueling, and growing this dysfunctional, disabling condition that lives inside of us. Today, I'm going to cover the 6 most common coping mechanisms that I see people with chronic anxiety use that tend to backfire massively and actually make their anxiety worse over time. And perhaps most importantly, I'm going to tell you what you should do instead of these 6 ultimately dysfunctional but well-meaning coping techniques. The first way that you're accidentally making your anxiety worse is by telling yourself that you're overreacting when you feel anxious or stressed about something. This is one that seems like it would be such a common sense technique to use. If I can help myself see this thing that I'm reacting to right now is not as big a deal as it feels like. If I can put it in the right context or remind myself I've been through worse or other people have it harder, won't I calm down and relax? No, absolutely not. And the main reason is the brain is an organ. And because it's an organ, it wants you to survive way more than it wants you to be happy or comfortable. And anxiety is its sometimes dysfunctional way of trying to bring your attention to what it thinks might be a threat. Now, your brain's sense of what might be a threat is often impaired. It can be very affected by past pains or traumas or unexpected stressors. We all have vulnerabilities. We all have certain things that we tend to assess as being scarier or more problematic than they really are because of things we've been through in our past. But when you try to cope with those feelings by basically just telling yourself that you are wrong and that your feelings are inappropriate, because your brain feels like it's trying to warn you about something that could be dangerous, it actually grows the anxiety rather than shrinking it. Because it feels like I'm putting this warning sign out there to you, and you're not seeing it. You're not understanding that this is a problem. It's exactly the same as if somebody else invalidates you. If somebody else says, hey, the feeling you're having right now is not appropriate. It is out of proportion to the stressor you're experiencing. You still feel the stress, but now you also feel misunderstood or invalidated or invisible. And so the feeling grows and grows and grows because it wants to be seen and understood because it thinks it's trying to raise attention to a problem. So when you tell yourself, you're overreacting, calm down, this isn't that bad, for most people, that will actually spike your anxiety and make it bigger. What you should try to do in these situations is what feels like the exact wrong thing to do, which is to validate the anxiety. It's to acknowledge, yes, we are going through something really difficult, really stressful right now. This is a hard time. This is a scary thing. I know it seems like acknowledging that to yourself would just like increase the feeling because you're basically like putting your stamp of approval on it and saying, yes, you're right, this is terrible. But because that helps us feel connected and heard and understood, and one of the ways human beings find safety is in social situations and social connection, the anxiety actually tends to shrink when it is validated. And that again is true whether it is someone else validating you or whether it is you validating yourself. So try not to invalidate your own anxiety. Instead, try to communicate to yourself that you see where this is coming from and that you understand it and that you have a plan to try to help make it better. The second way you're accidentally making your anxiety worse is by avoiding stressful situations. This one, again, I know that seems like it would help because if I stay away from the things that cause me to experience this really intense, debilitating anxiety, won't I feel the anxiety less often? In the short term, possibly. In the long term, no, absolutely not. Because every time you stay in your comfort zone, Rather than doing something that causes you to feel anxiety, you are essentially proving your anxiety right. You're reinforcing all of the thoughts and feelings that your anxiety is putting in your mind. I can't do it. This is too hard. It will go terrible. Every time you don't do it, every time you don't face your fear, your anxiety actually gets reinforced because you're basically confirming, like, yeah, if I had done that, it would have been terrible. So by not doing it, I made the right call. And you have this essentially like alternate reality that you never get to experience where you don't know how it would have gone. You never get a chance to find out if it was really as bad or as scary or as impossible as your anxiety was telling you it was. If you ever want to shrink your anxiety long term, and maybe eventually get to the point where this isn't a thing that controls your life, you have to put yourself in situations where it is possible for your anxiety to be proven wrong, which means you have to do the things that cause you anxiety. This is called exposure therapy. Now, here's a little asterisk. Hierarchical or gradual exposure therapy works better than what we call flooding, which means basically like diving headfirst into your greatest fear. That's typically not recommended. What you should do in order to try to face your fear is go step by step. Take one step out of your comfort zone in whatever domain your anxiety is showing up in. Don't take 10 steps out, but also don't take 0 steps out. Both of those extreme responses will grow the anxiety. What will shrink the anxiety over time is gradually doing things that scare you in a logical, stepwise manner while using your other coping skills and getting to the point where you become comfortable doing those things. The trick here is that you have to stay in the situation long enough for your anxiety to go down. It's a lot like getting used to a cold swimming pool. If you jump in, but then jump right out because it's miserably cold, you never have time to adapt to the temperature, and it feels just as cold the second time you try to get in. But if you let yourself stay in that cold pool long enough for your body to adjust to how it feels, eventually it just feels normal. Anxiety works the same way. You can adapt to stressors by practicing being in the situations that create the anxiety. And once you do that enough times, it becomes part of your comfort zone. And then you take that next step and you just keep going step by step until you can do pretty much whatever you want. The third thing you're doing that's accidentally making your anxiety worse is consuming too much caffeine. This is such a common one. Many people with anxiety overuse caffeine, which makes perfect sense when you consider the fact that two of the most common symptoms of anxiety are fatigue and insomnia. So people with anxiety are tired a lot and need a lot of caffeine to get going. Plus, life is hard and stressful, and caffeine helps us get through the day. Problem is, caffeine is a stimulant, and it increases activity in the brain and the nervous system. Anxiety also is caused, at least in part, by increased activity in the brain and the nervous system. So it's like you're pouring gasoline on a fire, basically. Not only does caffeine directly make your anxiety worse by increasing activity in the already hyperactive parts of yourself, it indirectly makes your anxiety worse by making your insomnia worse. And the less sleep you get, the worse your anxiety gets. We'll talk about that one in a minute. I personally try to keep my caffeine intake very low, and I have noticed a massive difference in my anxiety since doing so. Slight disclaimer on this one is that I am hypersensitive to caffeine to the extent where if I drink like a normal full-size coffee, I feel as though I have been drugged, and I once got insomnia from eating a pot roast with a coffee rub on it. So you may not be as ridiculous as me in this domain. I have found a lot of benefit in switching to lower caffeine stimulants. One that I've been really enjoying lately, and this company, just so you guys know, was kind enough to sponsor today's video, is a product called Magic Mind. They're little matcha green tea energy shots, and they do have a small amount of caffeine, not enough that's going to make you jittery or stressed out or give you insomnia. They enhance the stimulant properties of the caffeine with things like nootropics and natural mushrooms and other ingredients that actually help create a sense of focus and concentration and alertness without a lot of the side effects and anxiety-inducing properties that high amounts of caffeine that you would find in things like energy shots, energy drinks, cappuccinos, etc., tend to have. So if you have anxiety, Magic Mind is definitely something I would consider looking at to replace some of the caffeine that you're currently consuming to deal with the symptoms of anxiety. I'll leave a link below if it's something you want to check out. The fourth way that you're accidentally making your anxiety worse is by overscheduling and overcommitting yourself. Many people with anxiety cope with things like perfectionism and high levels of productivity. We think if we get all our stuff done and get it done really well, that will help us relax because we have all this nervous energy, this stressed energy inside of us. And if we find a healthy adaptive outlet for it, we think we'll feel better. And to a degree, this one is true. But because people with anxiety tend to be really rigid type thinkers and very literal thinkers, if we put 10 things on our to-do list, we might often feel like I have to do all 10 things on that list. And we don't always give ourselves a lot of wiggle room for the fact that days tend to go in unexpected ways from time to time. So sometimes you might get to 2, 3, 4 p.m. You're looking at your 10 item to-do list and you've got 3 of them done. And you think, oh crap, I'm not going to be able to get all this stuff done today. And it actually spikes your anxiety, which is probably completely unnecessary, because if the only person who really expects you to get all that stuff done today is you, because you are being an overachiever as a way of coping with your anxiety, once again, you are accidentally making it worse by having ridiculously high expectations for yourself. If this is you, I want you to try to, this is going to be hard because this is me and I know it's hard. I want you to try to gradually trim down your expectations for yourself in terms of at least volume. Because if you're overcommitting every single day and running yourself ragged, trying to do a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually have to get done that day anyway, surely you can see how that's not going to actually be beneficial for your anxiety. Just step it down a notch, little by little, bit by bit, until your life feels a little bit more manageable and you actually have some wiggle room, maybe time for breaks or downtime or social connection, so that you can actually enjoy your life a little bit and not have it just be a grind fest to get stuff done. The fifth and sixth ways that you're accidentally making your anxiety worse, yes, I'm combining them and you'll see why in a second, are restrictive dieting habits and not getting enough sleep. Well, these are two very different problems. They essentially have the same impact on your brain and on your anxiety, which is they don't give your brain enough resources to perform one of its most essential tasks, emotion regulation. The two most essential physiological building blocks of your brain's functioning, other than blood flow, are rest and caloric energy. If your brain is significantly lacking in either of those resources, it enters somewhat of a low power mode, similar to what your phone or laptop or tablet might do when the battery's low. When your brain is in low power mode, the part of itself that it powers down the most is the prefrontal cortex. One of the things the prefrontal cortex does is regulate your emotions. Your emotions are generated in your midbrain and handled in your prefrontal cortex. So if you still have a midbrain going at full force and a prefrontal cortex that's operating at maybe 25%, you have big feelings and small coping mechanisms. Your brain in those moments, whether they're days or weeks or whatever they are, is functioning physiologically in a state very similar to an adolescent, a teenager. Because teenagers have fully formed midbrains, but they have teeny tiny prefrontal cortexes. That's why all teenagers, to those of you teenagers listening, I'm sorry, but this is true, and it was true for me as well. All teenagers are somewhat crazy. That's why you cannot diagnose an adolescent with a personality disorder, because they all act like they have personality disorders, because they have the emotional range of adult and the coping skills of a child, basically, or preteen. It's a really, really tough time. And so you might feel some of that chronic dysregulation that you felt back in your adolescence as an adult of whatever age, if your sleep or your nutrition are really lacking. So these are really fundamental building blocks that are incredibly important to managing your anxiety. Now, again, we're stressed, we're busy, we are worried about the way we look. I know it's tempting to go on diets, it's tempting to stay up late to relax or get stuff done. Both of these patterns, ultimately, more often than not, are likely to be counterproductive in helping you manage your anxiety. So nourish your body properly and give it rest when it's tired. There is really no substitute for these two things. And if either nutrition or sleep hygiene are not in a good place, your anxiety is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to control. I hope these 6 tips were helpful in you managing your anxiety. These are things I integrate into my life every day, and they make things much better for me. Take care, and I will see you next time.